Welcome back to You're Always Fine, a space to show up for yourself and embrace the mess that lives underneath because, let's be real, it's exhausting always being fine. So grab your headphones and allow yourself to listen, laugh, and even cry because you are not alone and we aren't always fine. And that's okay.
In late 2021, I was working remotely as a therapist and facing problems most of us do in the profession. High caseloads, no resources for clients who need more than that 1 hour a week, and the unfortunate storyline of mental health in America today. We all know it too well. I was frustrated one night, so I was doom scrolling. Now don't judge, I doom scroll LinkedIn. That's when I found a job listing for the head of mental wellness at Cabana. And while easy apply is always a great incentive, what caught my attention was their tagline, the new front door of mental health. I'm your host, Christine, and today I'm excited to finally welcome David Black, the founder, CEO of Cabana, and my boss. Let's get into it. David, welcome to You're Always Fine.
Hey, Christine, thanks for having me. I'm excited to get to share a little bit and chat with you.
So there's a lot to get into today, but one thing I know for sure about business is that the ones that succeed, there's always a strong why. So let's go ahead and rewind back to 2019. And could you share with us what was happening in that time in your life?
Sure. So I will, if we're going to go in a way back machine, I'll wind back even further to 2017. So my background's all healthcare. I took a role actually back in 2016 working at Johns Hopkins Medicine and wound up in insurance of all places, which I didn't expect my career path to take me there. But I was doing work for all sorts of populations, Medicare Advantage, employers, and just really learning about how we pay for healthcare in the U.S. market. I also, when I started at Hopkins back in 2016, actually lost my dad to a late stage cancer diagnosis, and it was about 3 months' time of notice, which from a silver lining perspective was great because I had a chance to spend time with him, work through challenges, have those meaningful conversations that not everybody gets. But I didn't talk with anyone about that. So in 2016 into 2017, in that year, I started a grad school program while working full time. I got promoted, and so I had a bigger role, managing a bigger team. And then my second son, Colin, was actually born in October of 2017. And so I was busy, staying busy, and just didn't realize that I hadn't talked to anyone actually about my dad. I just kind of processed that challenge as part of life's journey. And I found myself in into November after Thanksgiving, which was just about the anniversary from when my dad passed, on a flight for work. And I sat next to a stranger on the plane who was headed to his dad's funeral. And it had been the anniversary. And so I shared, I had lost my dad. And we start talking, just two strangers on a plane. And I realized that his dad had passed for the exact same cancer that I'd lost my dad to. And very quickly, that just accelerated the discussion for us. And we spent the rest of the flight talking about what it was like. I kind of felt like I'd found someone just by the stars aligning who was on a similar path as me, but was just at a different point in it. And I walked off that flight realizing I hadn't talked with anyone about it and kind of surprised for myself that I hadn't done that, but also how much I needed that, how much value I found talking to someone who was going through a similar experience as me. And I kept thinking about two things after that flight. One was, how amazing was it that the stars aligned? I sat next to a person who's going through something similar. And also what made me feel comfortable. In fact, it went from two strangers on a plane to a really deep conversation really quickly was pretty powerful for me.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
At the time, as you're processing this, and trying to get to the why, did you also kind of reflect of like, were you actively against it, or was it more like a subconscious, like, I haven't talked to someone and like the days become months, become years? Or Was there like a resistance you didn't know and then that became comfortable for some reason? Or
Yeah. I don't know if I definitely haven't thought of it that way. I know that it didn't hit me until after that flight happened that I realized I hadn't really talked to anyone about it. I'd had friends or family express the "I'm so sorry for you," but my response when I got that comment was, to an extent, um, I appreciate it, thank you, but you haven't been there. So it was this kind of just numbness of feeling like my experience was really unique and not having someone that was a friend that I could relate to. I had family members, but just the kind of nuance of where I was in my career, it just didn't feel as relatable to me. So I didn't talk about it. I really only noticed it after that when I would do these rides home from work, and the commute was when I'd always call my dad, and that was just an empty space. So I'd have these moments where I was just thinking. And so I reflected after the flight of, oh gosh, those were lonely points in the time where I felt the void in my life more than any other time.
I'm smiling right now because we've worked together for 2 years and, I build the content here and we've talked often about this commute time, commute meditation and stuff. And it wasn't until this moment, and I've heard this story a few times, and it wasn't until this moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's like part of the onion of like when we talk about doing things in commute time, because you're right, the car is a huge like void. Anyway, just a moment for me to kind of connect it and be like, wow, he's not just saying that because like, the data says that, but that's like a personal point of why it's probably important to you to, I think you've recorded like a commute meditation and stuff. Anyway, just a moment that I was like,
Yeah.
wow, that's
Well, yeah, I think the kind of fast forward here is I got off that plane and then a week later at work was looking at a statistic that people take a long time to seek support. And the number didn't feel believable to me. It was 11 years on average. And after that flight, it made more sense to me because I realized I'd been going a year without actually doing anything, having those kind of empty rides where would have benefited from having some level of support, but I wasn't going to raise my hand in the room and say I need to talk to a therapist. And right, wrong, or indifferent, the convenience factor of it, as well as just the self-reliance factor. I'm stubborn. I try to do house projects before hiring a professional for it. That's worked in some areas, and I've gotten dirty or shocked in other areas. It's
that table incident when we set up the office too. Can't let you go on that one.
yeah. So, the reality is I realized that I was part of that statistic, and just the kind of stars aligned for me on a couple levels where I had that flight, that personal experience that connected me to a why, which is too few folks seek support soon enough. And for practical reasons, comfort and convenience.
And I think, everything you were talking about when you were saying what was going on in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone, right? Like that our brains are wired to protect us, to like keep the status quo. So you had a lot of things to occupy. You were pulled in a bunch of different areas that made it easy to realize like, oh, wow, it feels like it was yesterday, but it was a year ago, and I think
no shortage of excuses.
Yes, exactly. Just being a dad to two, I mean, and a husband and, a career is a lot. And, I think you bring up a great point too that we don't really talk about a lot, which is we have this expectation, right? That if we have a close family or we have a good marriage, that's the person you tell everything to and you talk to that person. And unfortunately that's not the case. That's not a depth. Like, yes, you need good communication in the unit, but your marriage isn't defined by you going to your wife and talking to her about the grief you're experiencing or not, right? Every microcosm has its own dynamic. And, so I find it personally hard when I'm with my own therapist, who I've been with for years now, to say what I want to say or get it out. Like, it's just not, we all struggle with that vulnerability, even in the safest places. That's, my therapist always laughs because I always do my therapy in the car. She's like, but no one's there. I'm like, yes. However, it just, for whatever reason, that feels like, safe. And so I think it's easy to be like, oh, you have a great support system. But again, that's not the true, like barrier. And I think what you're hitting on, is shared connection in which, again, there was an ease to be on the same plane at the same time in the same moment that, that like whatever that vulnerability did or whatever that path was forged for you for the next 3 hours. So many things could have gone wrong. So he puts his headphones in before he says, am I sitting here? And the whole thing changes, And so, I think that's when I hear, I'm not surprised at all about that 11-year statistic. I think part of that is because it's like, oh, well, something must be really wrong if I can't talk to my super supportive wife or my brother or, and that's not really, the case of.
No, so some of it, I don't think I was really self-aware enough to know how much I was struggling with it. It was just this emptiness and numbness that I was kind of able to, I would say I fell probably in that languishing to moderate well-being spectrum, where I may not have met a clinical diagnosis at that moment, but I was having ups and downs, and it just, something about that plane made it comfortable for me. I've been spending a lot of time since then thinking about social networks, the types of support that we get, who we get that from. And there's a concept, weak tie versus strong tie networks. And I think we've talked about this a little bit. It's the spouse is that strong tie network, but there's a lot of value we get from strong tie, but there's also a tremendous amount of value that we get from weak tie networks. These in-passing interactions that we have with strangers where we can control what we're sharing, how we're sharing in that. And it's not everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas type of experience. It's just an element of, I can find more transactional level support from someone, and I can ask questions that don't have a ripple effect into my whole relationship or persona. I'm not ruining my friendships by raising questions you're going to maybe read too much into when it's just a question. So,
well, two things come to my mind. One, I resonate with that so deeply because I think you so eloquently put like why it was always easier to talk to the internet or like go on and talk about my disease or what I was experiencing. I felt such like, again, my level of understanding this as a therapist, I think has only been amplified by my personal experience with this to really understand what that darkness looks like when you don't know you're in the darkness. And how, again, like people I've never met, people from across the world, connecting, like it's been incredible. And sometimes it feels weird, it feels weird that I know at one point Carrie was like, she was really hurt. We had to like go into session about it because she felt like I could connect to anybody but her. She was right. Everything she said made me feel guilty about my disease. I miss when you cook dinner. She was trying to connect with me. All I heard was something else I wasn't doing. And so to your point, I think, those, we hear it as weak, but the other example, I know it's not a great one, is I always say when people are talking about like cheating, right? It is so easy to have an affair. Think about it. You get all the best parts of something and none of the strike, right? Like it's none of the work. It's, of course, like that's an appealing option, but in the same way, it kind of ties to this too, like I could talk about rare disease, period. I mean, for the first 5 years of rare, I never even said I was a therapist because I never wanted anyone to know or think that that wasn't the role I wanted to hold there. And I got to do that. You were the keeper of information in this way. So I think that that's a really deep thing there.
Yeah, there's no history there that crowds what you're trying to get across or what type of support that you're looking for. And so it's, I don't think it's emotional baggage by any means, but there are different types of ways for us to get support. Yeah. And where we feel comfortable in the moment can vary. It's why you mentioned kind of being comfortable in your car. Now, there's some privacy that afforded to you that has now been translated into just, this is where I'm most comfortable, where I can disclose what feels safe to me, irrespective of who's in the house and who isn't.
Exactly.
So like you've created an environment that's comfortable for you, and that may differ depending on the social setting, the support you're getting for.
And topic, right? Like, I think different topics cause like, again, like different space, I could talk to anybody about Like when I'm sitting in the therapist seat, doesn't matter where I am, but I also know that like if certain clients see something different, it will be like a 10 to 20-minute conversation where they're like going through the checklist of what makes them feel comfortable. And of course I allow them to. I'm like, no, I'm just in a different house. I'm in a closed, but again, like that level of comfort, which I think ties back into this whole journey where, okay, you get off the plane and now you're going back home to, your family. And how do you go back to, so this is in your mind, but you have to go back to work and life and kids. Like, so what happens next?
Well, so I have this flight. It just plants this seed in my head of, gosh, I needed that. And what was comfortable about me talking, kind of wondering how I went so quickly into talking with a complete stranger about something that felt very personal to me. And a week after I was in grad school and we had class on the weekends, and this was one of those times where it was in person, and I see a classmate of mine who's a Green Beret veteran, has an app that he wants feedback on. And it was for a military audience, but he just wanted people to try it out and get feedback. And it was a virtual reality app at the time. And I tried it, and it transported me to another place. It was literally practicing language in another country. And I was in an office building just outside of DC, and I felt somewhere else. And that experience got me thinking about space and about digital space. And I'd been doing lots of Zoom calls for work, and I was just annoyed at just how we took a camera and slapped it on what would be an in-person interaction and called it digital. And so that kind of experience, which I think just happened to be so close to me taking this flight, gelled the concept of we really haven't done much when it comes to innovating digital spaces, in particular to prompt a desired output. We've created Zoom fatigue, and we've created anxiety at looking at ourselves in our own image when we're on these web calls. Like we've had unintended consequences. We haven't actually stepped back and how do we want people to feel when they're in a digital space? And I started thinking about the power of designing a digital medium to not only make you feel comfortable, but to connect you with those people who aren't in your social network, but are on that same part of journey. So you could get that form of support, kind of recreating the flight experience for me.
I find, like I said, I guess I never realized how close these two events were together because again, like change one thing, change everything. And, I think it's really crazy that it would have just been like one of those things where you're like, oh, wow, VR is a cool thing. I'll go to a Taylor Swift concert when they, as opposed to it being in a certain sequence in which like I can give, like that could be where, like, I don't know. I feel like that's a really, again, something that has to be so vulnerable in order to stick with you long enough that when the next piece falls into place.
Yeah, it really just felt like it wasn't one single moment where it was a series of events that happened to just gel this concept in my head, but it happened over the span of about 2.5 weeks. And then it became this concept of using a digital space to create groups and moderated support. And it became this idea that I couldn't shake.
I was just going to say, and then the entrepreneurial bug, like, because I've been there and where it's like, you cannot explain where you get the strength or to like do both, where it's like you're working full time and then you're building all night. But I know exactly what you're talking about when you believe in something so much that like you can't stop until it's coming.
Yeah. It was very much right time, right place for me. So that personal element happens. I then have a classmate who has me thinking about the medium. But then the sheer process of me being in grad school had me priming myself. I built a level of confidence in my own abilities to not be someone as a spectator, but actually, to think about the Roosevelt quote, to be a person in the arena, to actually create something. And so I don't think had I had this flight and had that experience without the same timing of going through that grad school piece and realizing less about where do I want to find a job and more about where do I want to look back 10 years from now and say, I did this, I helped create this. It became much more about my why. And it was just a function of timing for me.
So here's my next big question, and that has to do with because I know when that bug hits, right? Like, and it becomes, honestly, it feels a little bit like an addiction, like when something is just so good you can't ignore it. Maybe that's the new quote, David. We're no longer going to wait for other people. Be so good you can't ignore yourself. But not gonna lie, so like you're getting into a space you've never been into, right? Like you're not a clinician. You've had this, by your own words, essentially pushed off your own mental health for a year.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question is like, when did that you've built the thing, right? Cabana exists, right? So you get to the top of that mountain and then you're like, oh wow, you can't be the entrepreneur or the person like that. That spark can't last forever kind of thing. Like, it's gotta be maintained now. When did you or like ever think like either like, oh my God, I built this, but like I haven't even done therapy, or oh my God, I built this and I like, you know what I mean? Like some sort of maybe imposter syndrome, or maybe it's did you ever circle back on your own mental health, or how did that kind of shake after you kind of did the thing?
Oh yeah. I think every entrepreneur I've met, it is a support group every time you get more than one entrepreneur talking to another in a room, because by definition, you're doing something that hasn't been done before. And so it comes with a whole host of doubts about, from the concept, the approach, the knowing the balance between, am I being stubborn versus being passionate versus being wrong? And also just needing to listen to people. And so there's a very humbling experience that goes into, at least for me, where you have this idea and you have versions of self-doubt from the get-go, and then that evolves as it goes through. And so it's one of those experiences where you have to, the sooner that you can find humility and guidance from others, the better off you are at addressing those self-doubts. So, case in point, I'm not a mental health professional. I don't play one on TV. I don't pretend to be one. I'm just someone that has been on the business side of healthcare and seen frustrations about the fact that we don't have enough providers. We have a payment system that in some cases doesn't pay enough to those providers. And we have a whole swath of people, 50% plus, depending on the state, that never seek support. So like we have a functional problem in the system that I am confident I know well enough, but I also am confident that there are a lot of clinical experts out there that can help us. So it becomes more about understanding your role and where do you go and find the right expertise to help. So what role do I play? What role do others play?
Well, and I remember in my interview, like crystal clear, remember it, when you said to me that essentially like, this isn't a sustainable system. And going back to the beginning of the episode, I told you 96 clients. I felt so seen by that one sentence of like, you could be doing great work, but like you can't, like, it's not you, you're not the problem. It's like, this is not made to work. And it was the first time I've ever in the profession ever been empowered to blow the box up, essentially, because in school and the way we practice and insurance, like, we talk about this a lot, it's the never ending hamster wheel. And there's not enough professionals. And that was when I was like, cause it is scary as a professional being like, the only clinician in the room, or being like, oh, we're going to go into corporate, it's, first of all, society tells us how to, like creates these like, things where it's like, oh, there's the people who go into this and because they care, and the people who go to business because they're this. And so, I know for me, it was instantaneous where I'm like, again, I felt like, again, a therapeutic moment where you were just like, allowed me to be like, yes, like there's so many other ways we could help support. And, very early on, even when we were creating, then it was the Balance 8, but, now what is now known as the Balance Self, you had said to me, you're just like, forget the textbook, like, and again, we go by the DSM, the this, the that. And it has been such a refreshing thing to be able to work here. And essentially where I think this, like your when you say you surround yourself with people that like have the expertise, where I feel we've gone head to head, people. If you're wondering, we go head to head often, David and I, in a very healthy way. But, he's not afraid to challenge old school thinking or bring, challenge any of it. And I'm not afraid to be like, hey, like we need more clinical voice in this. But I think that's what also is, so beautiful about one, you can confidently say that that's like truly combating imposter syndrome. That's an action, right? Surrounding yourself with people that, you trust to do that, with something that you hold so close to you, like through those actions, I think that, again, like innovation is like what I think of when I think of Cabana, even in a world where, we have so many mental health apps.
Yeah. Well, I also will say in this role, I get a chance to talk to a number of clinical professionals in this. And every time I go into a clinical professional conversation, I know I'm not a clinician, but I also know I've spent the past 7 years reading a ton of literature about what we are doing in the therapy community, in the mental health community in general, across the behavioral health spectrum. And to hear clinicians give feedback about how what we're doing fits into their clinical models, fills a gap, finds needs. I mean, those conversations are what increase my confidence level in the direction we're going and in the need for support. So I'm not standing here saying we're blowing up the model in the conventional sense, like a therapist is out of a job.
No.
I'm saying this in the sense that we've got an incredible product in one-to-one therapy that is in a storefront, and we've blacked out the windows. Mm-hmm. We've made the door really difficult to find and also really expensive for you to go into. And as a result, so many people are walking past that door. And so that is great that we have that solution there, but it is not meeting all the current need, and we've got to do something about it.
Well, and I think we've always known this, but I think what COVID did was because like, right, the idea of if I would have told my like baby right out of school self that like one day I would be on the computer, on the phone doing this work, I'd be like, okay. And, there's life on Mars. I don't know, like something silly because it's just unthinkable. And I think what is really unique about Cabana is, again, I've always loved that you've never tried to replace this. You know what I mean? Like there's no replacement. There's a spot for everyone. And I believe that, it's a continuum. But what I think has always been really well done is that, we don't have to do it just one way. And that's what I think is like limited in the profession. So COVID happens, and what it highlighted for me was, okay, even you take away the barrier, right, of like physical location, which is a big enough barrier. And now, you know what? Again, not that they're super affordable, they're more affordable through these things. And now you're even lowering the standards because we're licensed across, like there were so many things that opened up with COVID, with the big, talk spaces and all that. And it was still a huge problem. Like, there were still so many underserved. And that was a feeling when I was doom scrolling on LinkedIn. When I saw this, it was like a lifeline to being like, again, something that seems so simple now, 2 years working with you. But at the time, it was more like, oh, this could even be, again, easy apply is great because, you didn't spend much time on the application when you're like, okay, I don't even know, these people are probably bots because, you seems too good to be true. But again, I think just to your point about two pieces having to come together at the right time, I think COVID amplified that, how many barriers there are outside of the barriers that we originally knew. And then, again, without you coming and almost, again, blowing that box open for me, it doesn't happen. You know what I mean? Like I walk past that door too, like as a therapist, and I go next door, never talk to you, and continue just the cycle of seeing clients and trying to do as much good as I can.
Yeah. In all too often, we perpetuated a model of support. And I don't think we're the only ones recognizing this. You're seeing this happen already right now where there are different opportunities for individuals to find support. I do feel much of the innovation that's happening right now is just trying to fix the door or maybe the window dressing on that one-to-one therapy model, if you will, but isn't addressing the fact that there just aren't enough people to go around. And also that for some individuals, particularly a lower income population, therapy is an elective.
Yep.
It's an elective procedure. If you are choosing between where to spend $165, which is the average outpatient copay for someone that's out of network, and an expectation may not just be one conversation, but could in fact be multiple conversations to build that relationship, you're staring at a potentially $1,000 cash flow expense for someone that may be living paycheck to paycheck. And
even the insured though, right? Like with EAPs, they're a great solution, but unfortunately, I can't tell you how many times I'm begging EAPs to give me, mind you, we're talking 2 more sessions because there's no asking for infinite or mental health maintenance. There's none of that, I'm begging, I am fighting and letter after letter for 2 sessions to be approved, or enough so that I could feel like I'm handing someone off with, I don't know, some confidence that I've done no harm, or, it's not in the middle, because how much do you really get done in 6 sessions? I mean, let's be real.
yeah, it is tough. So the point here is that is one model that we have been trying to use to apply to everyone across the spectrum. And if we're willing to pay for it and if the funds are there and we can make it work, great, but it's an expensive model and it is not going to be something that we can scale. We haven't demonstrated that we're able to scale that to meet all the need. We just haven't. And we, even through COVID, we haven't.
That's what I'm saying. COVID was our best shot of even accept, and that's what I felt. The 96 caseloads when I told you, I'm like, yeah. And the expectation, again, we get people to pay that fee by saying 24-hour therapists, and all those things. And so I'd love to know you've been in this now Cabana's been around, I think May 5th is
so for us, Cinco de Mayo is actually Cabana anniversary for when we launched Cabana. We've as a company have been around just around 4 years, getting our starts within the Air Force. But Cabana, the work we've been doing specific for those groups, started Cinco de Mayo.
So now, right? Because I think I see how much I've learned as just like a person professionally. What era are you? Where do you see now it going? And with the facts that now we're in a post-COVID world, and that has changed. But that a lot has changed because of that too.
Yeah. So we've been working with health systems, hospital employers for going on 3 years now. If you think about individuals that work in a hospital setting, there's so many roles in a 24/7 operation that runs, that actually working, supporting every employee across a hospital system has been a good test case for us at supporting the general demographic across the US, across really any employer. And the model we've built, we feel applies completely based off the data we've seen, the outcomes. So for us, this is about how do we take a model, makes mental health care support way more affordable, significantly more accessible. We're talking drop-in support. How do we just make that available to a larger population? So for us, it's about expanding our reach. The thing that excites me so much is this concept of, you teed it up perfectly, Christine. Where do you feel comfortable getting support? So we're not going out and providing cars for everyone as a private space, but we are always thinking about not just the digital environment, but where does Cabana help create a safe space? So where do we help you create privacy a digital way with the people that you're connecting with the room design, but also realizing that sometimes you want an actual quiet space. So you want to have a space that feels comfortable for you. And many people attend therapy sessions not at home, not in their bedrooms, but in the car, because there might be a loved one that you don't want to overhear, or just the risk of that. So
even if you're not talking about them, right? Like it's the craziest thing. But to your point, where do you feel safe? And I think it's really nice to a lot of what we do is talking about, finding your Cabana mentally, so that no matter where you are, right, you can get to a safe space. Because location and visualization, we know, is so big, big in order to stop that fight or flight, big or small.
Yeah. So when I think about accessibility, there are many ways that we can make something feel more accessible to someone. And that is always, as you think about the design of the experience, it's great if you have effective 16-week long program, But if it's not designed to meet the person where they are in their real life, then it is sitting on a shelf, being dusted off if you can convince someone. So we're very much focused on how do we take the science and the body of knowledge of what we know works for individuals from a clinical perspective and just adapt it so that it meets real life challenges. From where do you feel comfortable getting support, the physical space itself, to how do you like to engage, to how much time do you actually have. Now, if I have a 60-minute requirement, but you only have 5, let's find a 5-minute option that helps you in that busy moment. Or a 3-minute option. So the piece that we're focused on is there are common barriers. There's the convenience of stuff. There's the privacy that I need to feel, the trust I need to feel from who's delivering that. And then there's also just this, I want to be able to have control over how I do something, the self-reliance of it. And so everything we're building maps just some of those barriers that keep you from getting support.
Well, here looks like a good place to stop. This episode was too good to only be one. So join us Thursday as we continue the conversation with David. Until then, mind your health.
Seriously, you're fine. You're fine because you have the power to access your place of peace anytime you need it. However, if you get stuck, we're right at the palm of your hand to help. Check out our show notes for this week's source list, recommended content, and Cabana live group schedule. We'll catch you next week for a brand new episode of You're Always Fine.
The team at Cabana has found your reset button. The answer? Cabana Pods, acoustic soundproof booths with immersive micro vacations proven to boost your mood in just 5 minutes. To learn more about Cabana Pods, visit www.evenhealth.com/pods.